Okay, we're live.
We're live.
Are you nervous?
Well, I'll just take another drink of my coffee and I'm sure I'll be fine.
Our giggly juice.
Yeah.
The truth is, it's not gig. It's actually so funny story. Last week, Chris and I did our podcast. So the truth is, and we actually had something called giggly juice.
Yeah.
It was Prosecco.
Prosecco. Yeah.
And it was amazing because we were drinking giggly juice the whole time, and it was awesome.
And this is very serious juice now.
This is very serious juice because today's topic is a very serious topic.
Is it?
I don't know. We're going to get into it.
Yeah.
So everybody, this is Jared Hope, and this is another edition of The Truth Is, and we have a special guest host, Carla Berry.
I'm super excited to be here.
Yeah. Put the mic a little bit closer because I was giving her the rundown of how to talk to the mic, and I told her just to put it like right close to your mouth.
Very good.
Yeah, that was a dirty joke. So we won't go there. That's the giggly juice talking, but seriously, we're here with Carla Berry, and Carla runs our company called Tilt Property Group. She's also like you're like my left hand and my right hand, my left leg and my right leg. You're like everything. And we talk a lot about you the last couple episodes. And so this is Carla Berry, everybody. Give a wave. This is Carla. We asked Carla to come on because we've been riffing all kinds of topics for the podcast, and one of them is horror stories.
Yeah.
Why horror stories?
So I was thinking about this today. About a year and a half. I thought it was this past fall, but I think it was before that. Jared and I were talking about different podcast topics and different blog posts and stuff. And Jared started sharing with me some of the stories of property management over the course of your decade or so.
Yeah, close to 20 years. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. And it was wild. Like literally I was like mouth open.
It's like, why would anybody do this business?
Yeah.
Like, why would you get into real estate with all these crazy stories?
It was such a fun conversation. I was like, you have to share this. This is so crazy. And you see all the articles in the news and stuff, and you see these horror stories, and like you read them and you can't look away, but you also don't learn kind of what the takeaway is, or you have no idea if they were just crushed in real estate, which I think there are some people who are, but you've come through it. So like that's inspiring and interesting in itself.
I think I've come through it. I'm not really sure, but we're gonna talk shit, like legit shit. So first of all, Carla, you are allowed to swear. This is The Truth Is. You can say anything you want. The truth is there is no truth.
Yeah.
And it's kind of the podcast. We just kind of riff it and kind of go with it as it is.
Well, I have a very I'm clean and I have a clean body.
Right,
we've worked long enough together to know this, right?
You never swear. So where do you want to start?
Yeah.
Well, there's lots. Like there's horror stories from, we were just talking before we went live, was a horror story from not paying bills to going bankrupt to strippers to we're going to tell the stripper story just so we're clear.
This is why you wanted me instead of Krista, because Krista would let you tell that.
You can't tell that story. I'm like,
exactly.
I can't tell the story. So, so I guess, first of all, hang on. So anyone who has a horror story, Max, I'm having a beer for you. No problem, buddy. I totally am. If anyone has a horror story, first of all, follow us on social media. Follow us on Jared and Krista, which is our Facebook and Instagram handles. You can follow me at the Jared Hope. Krista's KHope5. If you feel inclined to share this, our one viewer, or one listener, or one follower.
Yeah.
I think we're hoping to get up to 2 eventually. But feel free to share it and comment. Obviously, we're here to help and we're here to share. Why did we start up The Truth Is? Let's give, before we go into the horror stories, I want to share, you're so great at organizing, facilitating, and you're really behind the scenes. So why The Truth Is?
Why the name?
Why the name? Why the podcast? Why now?
Okay, well, there's a couple.
Because it's so easy for me to talk about it, right? But this is like a different perspective. This is your perspective of it, that all people see is me, and they see Krista. But you're gonna I want you to share a little perspective or yours.
Yeah. So the truth is, first of all, there's a couple different angles to this, and it's so interesting. So I've been in marketing for 20 years almost now. And the truth is, there's a lot of bullshit in marketing, right? Like, and it's boring. And it's like, everybody is trying to please everybody. We talked about this the other day, like the notion of cheese pizza. Like if you want to try and satisfy everybody, get cheese pizza. But I have never seen a spicier, more flavorful pizza than you and Krista. Yeah, totally. Like you guys genuinely cut through the bullshit and give it to people straight. So the truth is that, you know, if you want to get like just muddle through the jargon and cut through the shit and listen to the podcast, read the blog, because there's no bullshit in it. Yeah. And so like that's one thing.
They're real stories.
Every story that we write for the blog, The Truth Is blog, is all inspired by stories of your real life. Yeah. And it's just so freaking fun. The other thing is that you guys say it all the time, which is hilarious.
Well, the truth is, yeah. It has to be one of our favorite sayings. The truth is, we're always saying it. But
so it's very authentic.
But the important thing, like these stories are real, you know, and it's like we get together every Wednesday and just focus on the coaching, and we get Leanne involved. And as Chris and I are talking, you know, you're so great at pulling stuff out. It's like, because you have this seek to understand approach, whereas I have this, like, I'm just going to tell you what to do approach. And you're able to pull out these stories and come out. Christy says, "Good job, boss lady." So, but you're able to pull out these stories that are like, they're so fucking funny how you word them. And it's like and you're able to pull out them, which I'm assuming you're going to do tonight with the horror stories. We haven't practiced this. We literally spent 3 minutes as we were cracking our giggly juice, prepping for this, that, you know, like you're so great at pulling out the lessons learned from everything that, you know, makes it feel like the horror story is okay, or the situation was okay because there's a lesson in it. Yeah.
And by the way, like if we were to try and pre-plan and stuff, that just isn't your jam. You're like, there was no option for that.
No, I know. Okay. So let's what, you know, so prime the pump. Well, no, don't prime the pump, because that sounds a little wrong, but, what do you want? Where do you want to start with a horror story?
Yeah.
Do we like punch them right off the bat? Or do we share the drug story? Do we share?
I'm thinking that we might have to jump right into the suicide.
Oh, yes. Yikes. Okay. So let's first and foremost, let's set this up where, you know, like horror stories are going to happen, right? Like owning real estate shit's going to happen. Like you're not going to have a tenant pay. You might, but as you start scaling your business and you go from one, which you might be able to manage one if you live next door or down the street or within the same city, you might be able to manage one perfectly and never have a problem. But as you start scaling your business and you go from 1 to 3 to 5, more problems will happen.
Yeah.
So the point of all of this stuff is to say a couple of things. One, we're going to share some horror stories and kind of make some light of them, because as serious as they are in that moment, on the big picture, on the big scale of things, it's really not that big of a deal.
Yeah.
And so the whole point of tonight is to kind of make some fun and have some jokes at my expense, at our expense of the lessons that we've learned, but also to show people, to tell people that, hey, listen, like just get through it. Focus on the end goal versus the problem at hand, and just get through it, you know, because we've had everything. So what do you want to add?
No, that's absolutely it. Okay. And there are some ways that you can protect yourself better than others.
Yeah.
And, but like, I think the point too, is that you have to be willing to expect these things, right? Like when I first started working at Tilt, it was my first trip down to Edmonton.
Because we're in Kelowna. We're at the Kelowna office.
Yeah, we have 2 offices, one in Kelowna,
Three offices, one in Grand Prairie.
And one in Grand Prairie. So anyway, I go down to Edmonton. It's my first time in the office. I just started working in property management. It wasn't my background. Marketing was my background. And the team sends me out to post a notice on a door. And I go out to this fourplex, and we're posting a notice to do an inspection because we had some concerns about the tenant. And I go to post the notice, and I'm like, you know, all happy and like go to post the notice. And
so cheery, Carla.
Yeah. I'm like, look at me. I'm like property managing. And I go down there, and the door whips open, and this woman starts yelling at me. She's like, "You bitch, you are spying on me. And like, she just started yelling at me. And I was looking around like, are they pranking me? Like, I could not believe it. And I was like, like,
and that was your very first.
I assumed that this was part of the initiation because I'm like, what? Yeah. And so I could think, what I kind of took from that is, you're dealing with people, and there's all sorts of different kinds of people, and there's all sorts of different kinds of property, and you're going to run into these things. Right. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it was a little shocking.
What'd you do?
What I just kind of like took the picture of the notice and backed away, and you
didn't listen to her
I listened for a little bit, and I was like, but there was really no settling her down. Like, she had mental illness, and that was okay. But I really do think that the office might have been pranking me. Like, let's see if she sticks around.
I never heard that story.
Really?
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So. What a great initiation.
Thanks, Edmonton office.
So hang on. So before we get into the suicide story, my very first tenant that I ever had, and I've shared this story before. It's an unreal story. It was Eric and Rosa, and they rented this house at on 61st Street in Edmonton, 121st Ave, which is an area called Montrose. Not the best area.
Right.
Bought it, shouldn't have bought it. Like, I got horror stories from buying the wrong properties to tenant horror stories to drug horror stories, like, almost going broke. I got lots.
Yeah.
And so I didn't really know what I was doing. I had no idea how to manage properties. I had no idea how to manage people. Like, I was me, I'm so blunt. I just say things. And I was even worse back then. Like, I had literally no thought process. I just said it. And so I was dealing with these tenants, and these tenants got 8 months behind. And Eric, Rosa, we bought this house. It had gross blue windows. It needed work. It had a suite in the basement. So Chris and I decided to take this house on. And one day we're cleaning it, painting it, and all this other shit. And this lady, and I had this for rent sign in the window, front window. And I didn't have a for rent sign, but I took a fluorescent orange cardboard paper, like a big sheet of cardboard paper, because everyone else had these stupid rent signs. I'm like, this doesn't make any sense. Like, why put just your phone number? Let's give these people information, so I'm not wasting my time on the call. Hey, what kind of house is that?
How many bedrooms?
How many bedrooms? It's just, so I wrote it all on this piece of paper, and it was great. And it was a brilliant concept. And all of a sudden, this one Sunday, this red van pulls up, and Rosa, this lady, walks out. She has a chain, a cross, and 3 little kids. And she walks up, pulls them out of the van, takes them out of the van, walks up to the sidewalk. And she's like, hey, I see your place is for rent. I'm interested in renting it. And I said, oh, great. What's your name? She's like, I'm Rosa. What are you doing on a Sunday? She's like, we just left church. I'm like, hallelujah. Thank God.
The heavens are opening up.
The skies have opened. Until the angels have just, come upon us. And I literally rented to her on the spot. No credit checks. I had him fill out an application, no credit checks. Her husband was this guy, Eric, who supposedly the story was he was laid off, and just pulling at my heartstrings, just pulling at my heartstrings. End up renting to them. 8 months later, they're like 6 months behind on rent. It was a disaster. I had no idea what I was doing. Like, they kept on saying, I'll pay. And then, rent was like $1,800 or whatever it was. And then they would pay a little bit. And then, say $500. And then the next month, now they're like $2,300 behind. And then they pay a little bit. And then, so 6 months later, after all this, they're like $8,000 behind. And how could this happen? They're like church abiding citizens. They're like Catholic. They're like all this other stuff. Right. And Eric was unemployed, what, all this stuff. One night I was so mad. I went to the house, knocked on the door. It was like 8 o'clock at night or 7 o'clock at night. I knock on the door, and I literally, as Eric opens up the door, because he's dodging me, he's not replying to any of my messages. Right. Text messaging back then didn't really exist back in 2003, not for me anyways. And he opens up the door, and I seriously reach in, I grab him by the ear, and I pull him out, and I'm vibrating. I'm so mad. And I'm like, Eric, if you're not out of here in fucking 2 hours, I'm going to fucking come back, and I don't know what I'm going to fucking do. And I threw him back, like literally threw him by his ear. I can say this now because I can't get charged. It was like so long ago. It was like 2003, right? Like it's 2021. So however, it's a long time ago, 16, 18 years ago.
Statute of limitations is expired. Yeah.
And so I come back 2 hours later and wouldn't you know, they were gone.
Get out.
They were gone. I couldn't believe it. So I go in the house and there's stuff left, obviously, like they clean up and there's beds there and dressers there, but they were gone. I sold that house so fast. I'm like this. I almost got out of real estate after my very first property. So that experience with Eric and Carla, or Eric and Rosa.
I don't know your money. Don't hold my hand.
but that experience with Eric and Rosa almost got me out of real estate.
Yeah. You want to know?
I was so scared after that.
It's so funny that you say that because, like, in all honesty, one of the biggest mistakes we see is people not treating it like a business. And our business in particular, Tilt, is all based on relationships. So we don't lose the human aspect. We get it, but you still have to treat it like a business. And it's funny because like we deal a lot with when we go through the rigid application process, right? And a lot of times you'll like, tenants are wonderful. They're saying what they think you want to hear. Something comes up and you say, you know what, there's an issue and we'll need a cosigner. And like, it's like the Exodus, their head turns around 3 times and it's just like, fuck you. Yeah. Why would you need that from me? So
So another funny story. I have a client out of Ontario who doesn't do credit checks. And I'm like, dude, like, what are you doing? Like, do credit checks. No, they cost money. What I do is I have them text me their credit check. So they go get a credit check and then they text it to them. So I'm like, well, how do you know it's theirs? And so anyway, so we're talking. Funny story is that there was this one tenant that applied recently. We're just going through this now. And this tenant took a screenshot of their credit check. So the first page was the name, SIN number, whatever the information is. It was a screenshot.
Yep.
The next picture was credit, like all these things. Next picture, all these things. So I'm like, how do you know that's real? How do you know page 1 and page 2 and 3 are of the same people?
Yeah.
And he's like, well, it seems legit to me. I'm like, oh, let's just run her credit. Let's just run it.
Yeah.
And so the screenshots that she sent were like perfect. Everything's good. Like B+ tenant rating, stuff like that. And we ran her credit and she's a D-, all of these credits. So what she did is she took her credit, screenshotted her name, attached these other 2 pictures or 3 pictures that had all of these like payments and And I'm just like, that it didn't belong to her.
That's wild.
Crazy.
Yeah.
Right. Here's a horror story. We once hired this lady. Do I say her name? No, I won't say her name. We once hired this lady a long time ago in probably 2011. I knew nothing about hiring people, nothing at all about being a boss.
And this was a staff member at Tilt. Okay.
Yeah. So she was like we started Tilt. Chris and I started Tilt, but back then it was called a la carte property services. Then it turned to landlord rescue.
Yeah.
And when we turned to landlord rescue, we were growing. Like we were growing at a good pace. And so we hired a manager. No idea what I was doing. And we meet this lady and I didn't like her. Krista was bought into her just because of the story that she told.
Yeah.
You look at her, you're like, something doesn't jive here. Something doesn't make sense. And, so I'm like, whatever. I don't know how to hire anybody. So you're hired. So we hire her. We do some references. References are great. Oh my God, she's awesome. Oh my God. She's the worst fucking employee I've ever had in my life. Like she was a shyster. She was stealing money. It was a disaster. Like
Get
Carla,
out.
it was when we get off air, I'll share more of the story.
Yeah. I feel like I am a better employee.
No,
the bar was low.
Our standard was pretty low. Anyway, so we end up letting her go. She just disappeared. Yeah. She legit just disappeared because we were hot on her trail and we are catching her with all this stuff. And we ended up calling one of her references. It was fake. Oh, it was a friend of hers that did this reference because we called and we're like, hey, it's so-and-so. And it was like months later.
Yeah.
So we called and said, it's so-and-so. No, wrong number. I'm like, well, do you know so-and-so? Yeah, that's my friend. I'm like, oh, interesting. So the point of the story is people lie.
Yeah.
And whether we see it all the time with tenants. That's why, like, here's a question. How much weight do you put in a tenant reference, a landlord reference, or an employee reference?
I'll tell you this. What I put weight in is, does everything add up?
Right. Does it all flow?
Does this story make sense to me?
Yeah.
And if the story makes sense to me, then that's a good sign. But yeah, no, if the reference seems too good. So we had a situation recently, actually a couple months ago, and the landlord so the tenant was applying for a property. They wanted to get in within 3 days.
Yeah.
It was like push. We call the landlord reference. The landlord gives an immaculate reference. Immaculate. And it's like, this is the best tenant I've ever had, blah, 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 blah. I don't remember exactly how we found out. I think it was something down at the courthouse where Teresa had just run into something, but that landlord was evicting the tenant, and hence why the tenant needed to be in so quick.
Yeah.
But
then why would the landlord give a great notice?
Because they want them out. Yeah, because they wanted them out. And so that is actually one of the things that we look for as well, right? Like, why the urgency? So you have to be really careful.
So Krista just commented on Facebook. So Krista, obviously our main host, and she's decided she agreed to step back and let the amazing co-host come in, guest host. And Krista just said that reference that we called for this employee was her husband.
Oh.
So she just put a text or a post on the page saying that it was her husband. So crazy, right? Like, people just do the weirdest things.
Also just had, it was only 2 weeks ago, we had a reference, and the reference was the same person it turned out to be a step parent, so different last name, but that was their employee reference. That was their landlord reference.
Come on.
Yeah. And then, but it was 2 different numbers. So they gave us 2 different numbers, but we're like, did you sound familiar? Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Tenants do the funniest things. Okay. So here's Chris is waving at us because you said hi. I get it. Oh, I love my wife. So here's the story. So back in 2009, I have this property up in Grand Prairie. It's a legally suited house.
Yeah.
And we get a call. 2009 was a tough time. Like, we had the financial recession. The economy's going to shit. Stock market's going to shit. The States is going to shit. Like, everything's gone to shit, right? And at that point in time, I started self-managing my portfolio in 2008. From 2005 to 2008, I used 3 property management companies, and they were all fucking terrible, which led us to start up Tilt, or the first version of Tilt. And we got this call. I get this call from this tenant, and we were in Krista. I brought this up with Krista the other day, and she's like, "Where were we? We were in where were we? We were in, I want to say we were in Maui, but we were in Bubba Gumps.
Oh, that's what she mentioned.
Bubba Gump Shrimps or Bubba Gump or whatever it's called.
Bubba Gumps. It's the restaurant.
Yeah. So we're in Bubba Gumps, and I'm sure it was in Hawaii or something like that. And I get this phone call from the upstairs tenant, and the upstairs tenant is like, "There's a weird smell coming from my house." And I'm like, okay, like, everything's normal. It's like middle of the month. Everything's fine. Or towards the end of the month, everything's fine. Rent's paid. Like, this guy, maybe he moved out. Yeah. And so what I thought
it had no indication.
Problems. No problems at all. And everything was fine. And I got so many stories from this era. This downturn was so hard. With this, well, it was hard on us, but it was hard on a lot of people.
Right.
And so I send our maintenance guy to the house, and the next day post a notice on the door. And when he posts a notice, so it's a shared entrance. You come in, there's an entrance upstairs, and then you go downstairs, and there's an entrance downstairs with shared laundry. And they go downstairs, and as they go downstairs, he's like, something smells. And I'm like, wow, is it like mold? Is it like the fridge is full and the power's off? Like that, food going bad mold, not like mold on the walls, but moldy food or garbage or something like that. Yeah. And he's like, I don't know, something's up. So the next day he comes back to the house, he does an inspection, opens up the door. And as you walk in the door, you go to the right, there's a living room, there's a kitchen, there's a living room. And then as you go through the living room, there's a bedroom and a bathroom and all this other stuff. Well, actually the bathroom's to the left, but there's 2 bedrooms. And as he walks through, opens up the door, turns to the right, and there's this big pool of blood on the floor. And so as he walks, so now he's like, what the fuck is going on? Right. So he's walking with caution because he doesn't know what's going on.
Right.
He rounds the corner. And as he rounds the corner, there's a guy laying dead on the floor. And that guy, he shot himself. There's a gun there. And you look up and there's guts, like brain guts on the ceiling. Because
what you would expect for someone.
Like, just think about it. It goes in a hole and then it goes out expanded. Right. And so this guy took his own life and destroyed like my house. That was the least of the problems. Like there's a dead fucking body on my. But
as a landlord, floor. You're sitting there being like, "What the fuck am I going to do with this?"
And I'm in Maui or I'm in Hawaii or something like that. I'm like, "What the fuck do I do now?"
Yeah.
Like I had no idea how to handle this. I've never had someone kill themselves. I never had anyone die. Yeah. I've had lots of people die now, but at this point in time, I'm like, oh my God, this is like.
Okay, terrible. Just stop for you. Have had lots of people die in your suites now.
Yeah, I've had a few. Not, but of old age now. It's not like murders or suicides, stuff like that. But like I had an apartment building that was full of a lot of older folk, and I've had tenants that were in there for 15, 17 years, and they passed. Right. And so back to this situation, like. It was terrible. It was awful. Like, obviously we called the police and they came and did their thing, but, we had to deal with the parents and, like the parents still paid the next month's rent. The parents went in and cleaned it. Like that was that was gross and that was tough. It was sad. It was all kinds of shit that I was going through because I'm out of the country.
Yeah.
Horror story.
Like it just going back to that whole like separating business and emotion, like you get to those points where like, how the hell do you separate those two at that point? Mm-hmm. But you had to deal with the parents too. Hey,
they were awesome. They're like, yeah, we'll take care of it, and
I don't mean to be insensitive, but like, what about cleaning costs?
They cleaned it.
Get out.
The parents came in and they cleaned the house. They cleaned all the stuff off the ceiling. They cleaned the floor. They replaced we had to replace carpets, obviously.
Yeah.
They replaced, like they did everything. It was awesome.
And how did they contact you?
We called them.
Okay. So you had their contact information
a couple days later, because the police called them and then we called them a couple days later.
Yeah.
And we're like, I don't like, what do you want to do about this? No. It's not like, hey, you have to do this. Here's the da-da-da-da. It wasn't that. It was like, here, we have a situation.
Yeah.
I've never had this happen before. Like, what are your thoughts? Like, how do you want, sorry for your loss, but how do you want to handle this?
Yeah.
He had an insurance and his estate or whatever. It wasn't much, but I think he had like 25 grand or 20 grand of insurance or something like that. Yeah. And, so they paid for everything. Luckily. Yeah. Because it was fucked up. Like it was terrible situation.
Yeah. The thing about that is like, I think one of the things is you can look to the RTA for some things, right? Yeah. Like you can look for like, how would we handle the situation? But there is a human element to that, right? Oh, yeah. And calling up the parents and, offering your condolences and working together with them. That's
and me, amazing. Like I'll pick up the phone for the most part and I'll just have a conversation.
Yeah.
Back in the day, it was a little bit different. I didn't have the experience like I have now.
Yeah.
But that was a awful conversation to have. Completely awful.
Yeah. Yeah.
Completely awful.
But there are ways to work through these things, right? Like you gotta, I'm sure now it's a little more calm for you, but
yeah. Well, it's so funny. Like people always ask me, even on the team, they'll always say like, how, you never really get a charge on anything. Like, how's that? And I'm just like, well, because shit happens. You just get through it.
Yeah.
Just because something comes up doesn't mean I'm shutting down the business. Someone doesn't pay a bill or tenants don't pay a bill or tenant moves out, midnight move, like fuck, whatever.
Yeah.
Like,
so we deal with it.
All we do, like I look for three things when I approve tenants, and I've always done this for the most part. That's not true. I changed in 2008 when I started self-manage my portfolio. I was just renting to anybody. Like I had no system. I wasn't doing credit checks. I was barely doing references. I was just renting to people.
Yeah.
You have money, you have cash, sweet, you're in, approved. Have a nice vehicle, all your teeth, sweet, approved.
Yeah.
And, obviously that's the wrong way to do it, but
all your teeth. That was the checkbox.
Yeah, your teeth. That was the deal maker. And, so we've learned lots of lessons over the years, but what I've narrowed it down to is three things. One, I want tenants who are going to pay rent on time. Unfortunately, we don't know that, and unless you do a credit check. And well, that's not even true either. If landlords aren't reporting it to the credit bureau, we don't really know that either. So we want tenants who are going to pay the rent on time. We think they are. We want tenants who are going to take care of the house. We hope they are. But more importantly, we want tenants that in the event that they don't do 1 and 2, we can sue them and win.
Yeah.
And if we can't sue them and win, which is why the credit checks are so important, then we don't rent to them, plain and simple.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's a testament to go back to this horror story. He was actually a really great tenant, got into some problems, got into some trouble and some stresses. I can't even imagine what those would be.
Yeah.
But he had a solid family. He had a solid backing that they came in and took care of that.
Yeah.
Have you ever seen anything like, what's the worst thing you've seen in your 2 years of property management with us?
Oh, there's been, there's a lot of span, like there's a big span of different things, but just more on a humorous note, one where I walked in and I was like, you got to be fucking kidding me.
Come on.
Was like, in one of the properties, it was an apartment building. I think it was your apartment building, actually. And I came in the morning and the staff were like, we have an issue. We have 2 tenants standing in the hall of this apartment building, throwing pieces of chicken at each other.
Are you shitting me?
And I'm like,
and this was my building?
Yeah. And I'm like, well, is it raw chicken? Is it cooked chicken? Like, what's going on with this chicken? Like, what is going on? And I think so anyway, but I think one of the biggest things that when it's one-on-one, it's a little different. Like when you're dealing with one tenant or one,
yeah, it's a lot easier.
It's a lot easier. But when you're dealing with feuding tenants, that becomes an issue because it's hard. Like whose side do you take? Yeah. What is the real situation? And I think a lot of what we do is diffuse situations, but also we can go back and say, here's, you guys are expected under your lease to not impact people negatively who are living around you. Right. Yeah. So,
but I have a funny story. So I have a friend, this isn't my horror story. This is a friend of mine.
Yeah.
He does Airbnb. So he has a couple Airbnb suites, but he'll also Airbnb his room, like a room in his house. So this happened like last week or like 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
He Airbnb'd a room in his house to a couple. They show up to his house and he's like, yeah, I don't know about these people, but he lets them in. So they come in, they whatever they do in their room, they go to sleep or whatever. And at 2:30 in the morning, he gets woken up to a domestic. They're full on fighting, yelling, screaming. And all of a sudden this guy starts screaming, like wailing, like he's like dying. She took a butter knife and stabbed him in the back of the jaw and the neck, stabbed him, put a butter knife right through his neck. Crazy story. Yeah. So I'm like, he told me this on Monday. Him and I were talking. And he's telling me this story. I'm like, what the fuck? I'm like, what? One, who are you renting to? Like, 2, why did you let him in your house if they didn't? If your gut check wasn't there, and we'll talk about gut check too at some point. And 3, like, what the fuck did you do? He's like, well, I had to call the cops, and the cops came in. So they went into the room and they were doing like heroin or something, like some kind of drug.
I feel like it might not be heroin because I'm just like, I don't know.
Well, he did. I've never done drugs, but he did
some kind of hard drug.
They were doing some kind of hard drug. Yeah. And they got into this domestic. She went ape shit. He went ape shit, stabbed him with this thing. And so they came and arrested her. So this is a story of someone who doesn't know what he's doing. Like, he's a really great guy, but he's way over his head. Right. And so they arrest her and he allows him to stay. So what? I'm like, dude, what are you doing? Like, why'd you do that? I didn't know what to do. Yeah. And I didn't want to lose, like, he was on the hook for three nights stay. So that was on the first night. So I'm like, you let him stay 2 more nights? And he's like, yeah. So the next night, everything's fine. The next night, so they're there 3 nights, because the next night she comes back. And at that point in time, he kicked him out when she came back. And I'm like, fuck. I'm like, what are you doing? Like, anyways, crazy story. So that's a horror story of
I wonder what his review for them was.
But you got to be careful, right? Like, you really have to be careful with who you're, especially when you're living there. Like he lived there. Like, I'm like, dude, you're lucky you didn't get killed.
Yeah.
You know, like they could have been tripping out on some drugs and all of a sudden kill you.
Yeah.
You know,
we had in one of the properties the other day, someone who was on drugs, selling drugs, that kind of thing. Right.
Yep.
It's a fourplex we manage. Yeah. And the one tenant in the one unit he's doing drugs and selling drugs, and he has shitey people coming to the door, but the people are not going to the right door all the time. So they go to other tenants' doors, and the tenants are a little freaked out about this. And we had the same thing, like police were called multiple times, but how do you get this guy out? Mm-hmm. And we went through our options regarding, like, you know, here's how we can evict, and, you know, how much time will that take, and how much will that expose our other tenants to him still? And in the end, just going back to like taking a human approach, we called his mom. She was a co-signer she was a co-signer for the property. And we called his mom and said, you know, we can elevate this and evict him and continually call the cops and risk your son going to jail, or you can move him out the next day.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
So are they still paying rent?
Yes. Yeah. Because she's a co-signer. He was actually, his lease was coming up in 6 weeks. Yeah. So she paid out the rest of his lease.
Yeah. Well,
yeah.
Here's another horror story. I shared this one with you, and this is a crazy story. So back in this may be 2012, 2011, I have a tenant in the house, a single family house, great house. They had a little bit of a party. Yeah. Nothing bad, nothing big, nothing out of hand, nothing crazy. And I guess at some point in the night, one of the guys got a little stupid, one of the guests. And my tenant kicked the guy out. So so it's 3:30 in the morning. The tenant comes back to the house, the guy they kicked out comes back to the house. And as he comes back to the house, everyone's sleeping, everyone's out. And the guy knocks on the door. And as he knocks on the door, gets up. My tenant gets up, and as he goes to reach for the door handle, like legit reaching for the door handle, a bullet comes through the fucking door. Hits him in the guts.
Hits your tenant in the guts.
My tenant in the guts. So the bullet came from outside to inside from this guy that was kicked out of that party. Bullet goes through the door, hits him in the guts, and goes flying. Buddy, but he opened the door. Buddy comes in with a gun, starts bang, 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 starts shooting people. But no one like starts shooting at people.
Yeah.
Never hit anybody. So fired off like 3 or 4 shots and then took off.
So this winner of a guy leaves the party, comes back with a gun, and is a bad shot to me.
Yeah. You know, so this guy takes off, and it's like, once again, 4 a.m, something like that.
Yeah.
I get a phone call because I'm self-managing. I get a phone call, and the cops, RCMP, are like, "Hey, this is what happened." I'm like, "Fuck off!" Like, what do I do about that? Right? Like did you find the guy? Like, arrest everybody. So they end up, like, you know, obviously arresting everybody, or whoever was, you know, whoever they thought was at fault. They end up finding the guy who'd shot it. And the next day I call my tenant never got charged. Nothing ever happened. You know, he's fucking wounded, and it wasn't bad. It just grazed him. It wasn't like he was bleeding out. Anyways, the next day or a couple of days later, I call my tenant and I'm like, "Dude, you know, I have to kick you out." He's like, "Yeah, I kind of figured I was getting kicked out." And so anyway, so he ended up moving out like a couple of days later. And he ended up paying like 2 months rent. He covered all the rent until it was re-rented. And I look back at that situation, I'm like, fuck, was that lucky? Because 1, that guy could have killed everybody. 2, I could have, like, in different degrees of seriousness, like that obviously is super serious. But the other is I could have been out like months and months of rent, because it took a couple months to rent. And like 3, that could have like, he could have not left.
Yeah.
Because, like, under the Landlord Tenant Act, like, there's all kinds of things, you know, you got to make sure all other occupants are safe and you can't harm other tenants, but it's a single family house. And if this guy came back and said, well, it wasn't my gun, I had no idea who that guy was, I'm not leaving. Like obviously this guy was a bad dude to be hanging out with guys like that, because you're guilty by association.
Yeah.
You know, I think. And
it's not something that's happening to the average person.
Yeah, like that doesn't happen. I've never had that happen. I don't hang out with people like that. You know what I mean? So this happened to this guy. I'm like, oh my God, like this really, you know, I got very lucky that this guy was was
cooperative
and left.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that goes back to the whole like not getting overwhelmed, talking to being reasonable with people, right? So yeah, that's wild.
That was crazy. And then there's horror stories. Like I was talking to a client today. And the client today he has a fear. He's looking at buying another rental property. So he has two and he wants to buy another one. And him and I were chatting today, and he has a fear of what's going to happen to interest rates. Like the horror stories are not just horror stories of property management, like the horror stories of real estate.
Yeah.
And you've heard our story. Like, we almost went bankrupt in 2010. We almost got divorced in 2015. Like there's that story, which we've shared before. But, this guy has a legit concern. He's like, listen, like, I don't, he's like, the conversation I had with him today was, he's like, how do I build this business to not end up like your story? And I'm like, dude, that's a great question. And, so we talked about the market, we talked about all this other stuff, and he comes back, he's like, what about interest rates? Interest rates right now are 1.65%.
So many people, if you're not thinking about this, you should.
Absolutely. Yeah. Most people are like, they live in the moment of now at 1.6, and they don't think, well, what happens if it goes to 4% in 5 years when your term is up?
Yeah.
So this client and I had a great conversation today, and like his fear is kind of like something I never thought about in 2003 when I was buying properties and refinancing and pulling equity out in 2008, and things were great. And all of a sudden, things tanked in 2008, and I'm almost bankrupt in 2010. So with this guy, with his client, it's like, okay, to avoid that horror story, one, take the 1.65 and buy as many properties as you can right now. Like these rates are dirt cheap. So two things are going to happen. One, rates are going to still stay really cheap for the next 5-10 years, or 5 or 7 years, which probably not that long. They'll stay low for the next 2 or 3 years for sure.
Yeah.
But the reality is the government has to make their money back. And so that one thing could happen is rates could stay really low. The second thing that could happen is rates could go up. And if rates go up, let's protect yourself. So, if you go get a rate for 1.65 or 1.75% today, and you're going to make another $300 or $400 a month cash flow because of those lower rates, take that $300 or $400 a month cash flow, do one of two things with it. Number one, buy down your debt. So number one is increase your payment to buy down your debt. So in 5 years, when you refinance the property, you're going to refinance at a lower rate, which keeps your payments lower in the event that interest rates go up. Number two, keep all the money in the bank account. This is what I was telling this client. Keep all the money in the bank account, and then at the end of the year, take half of it and buy down the debt, and keep the other half as a slush fund. That after 5 years of doing that, now put it all onto the debt if interest rates go up. And if they don't go up, keep the money. So like that's a horror story too, because in 2008, I never did that. In 2008, I was refinancing my properties. I was staying leveraged out to the point that in 2010, I was losing money because my payments were so high.
Right.
Because rents dropped.
So to get that straight, so you're suggesting that you either take the low interest rate and pay down the mortgage as if you were paying a 3%,
Correct.
Or you take that money and set it aside if you got the willpower to.
Correct. But either way, take the low interest rates.
Yeah. Take it now.
Like right now, I see such a great opportunity. I see some potential issues coming up for Vancouver, Kelowna, where we are. Lower Mainland, which is Vancouver, Kelowna, or the GTA. I see some real issues there just because values are so high.
Yeah.
Whereas I don't really see those issues happening in Alberta just because values are so low and the cost of living is so low. Take the interest rates, take the cash flow, but repurpose that cash flow to protect your investment in 5 years in the event that interest rates go up. Mm-hmm. And this is a true story. Like Chris and I have, our mortgage payment is $6,700 a month. $6,700 a month is our mortgage payment. The other day, Chris and I were driving, and I told Chris, I'm like, we need to start making payments right now to buy down our debt. And she's like, why is that? I'm like, because if interest rates go from 1.62%, which is what I'm locked in for the next 5 years, if they go from 1.62% to 3.5%, my payment goes from $6,700 to $9,000.
Yeah.
Now I can afford that, but there's a lot of people that can't.
Yeah. And
why would I spend that much money later? So let's just start buying down the debt right now. That was my approach.
Yeah.
Another horror story. I had a tenant, 9718 up in another house in Grand Prairie, where this tenant got behind on rent. Single lady, couple kids, and she got behind on rent. So I kicked her out. I gave her a 14-day notice. She didn't leave. Once again, I didn't know what I was doing back then. I had no idea about the Landlord Tenant Act. It actually didn't. The RTDRS didn't exist back then, and or if it did, I didn't know about it. Right. And so I give her this 14-day eviction notice, and on day number 16, because that's how it works here in Alberta, or there in Alberta, I knocked on her door, and she's not there, but all her stuff is there. So I changed the locks. I'm like, I'm just going to take the house back. She's supposed to be out. It's been 14 days notice, 16 days total. I'm just going to take the property back. So I changed the locks, and this is in an afternoon. A couple hours later, locks are changed. A couple hours later, I get this call from this tenant. She's like, hey, I want into my house. I'm like, not a chance, not a chance, not a chance. And she ends up calling the RCMP. RCMP called me. I didn't know the Tenant Act really at all back in 2010. And which is funny because I was in the business for 7 years and I had no idea about the Tenant Act because I never took the time to understand it. And the RCMP calls me, and the RCMP, which has no jurisdiction in the residential world, like they have no governing, but they can't do anything to me. I didn't know that. RCMP calls me up. They're like, listen, you have to let her in. And so I'm like, fuck off. Like, I'm not letting her in. And the guy's like, listen, if she makes a request to get in, you have to let her in. So I let her in. I have two stories like this with the exact same situation for the most part. So I let her into the house. And when I let her in the house, I said, listen, if you mess up my house, I'm going to fucking snap. And
so this was not supervised. You let her in.
I had to let her in. Like, I literally drove back to the house and, my live ended. What's going on?
Technical issues.
Yeah.
Dawn.
It says it's still going. No, it's not. Let's see it. Let's see what it does here. Yeah, it looks like it's good. So I don't know. Maybe we're still on. Yeah, we're still on. So anyway, so sorry guys, technical issues. So anyway, I let her into the fucking house, Carla. And when I let her into the house, I tell her, I'm like, listen, like you can't do anything to this house. Like, I'm going to snap. And the next day I come back and she's gone. And I open up the door. I open up the front door. So it's there's an entrance in the front. There's an entrance on the side. And I come in and I open up the front door. And as I open up the front door, I see like my floor is caved in. There's just water, just like all over the place.
Get the fuck out of here. She left a tap
Have you ever
on
heard
or
this
something?
Story?
No.
So there's water just like all over the place, right? So I'm just like, what the fuck? And I lose my shit. Like, I'm losing my shit, obviously. I go around to the side of the house and it's a bi-level. So there's like 5-6 stairs up, 5-6 stairs down, and there's a landing. So I open up the door, I look up, and it's like the humidity in the house is out of control.
Just gross, eh?
It was unbelievable. And it was maybe 18 hours. Okay. There's maybe 18 hours difference in time from the last time I was in that house.
Yeah.
And then I go down the stairs, and as I go down the stairs, there is, I bet you, 12 inches of water. Like, however high these plugs are sitting. So the water was just under the plugs of the walls. So call that 12 inches. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, what the fuck? What the fuck? What the fuck? I go upstairs, like maneuver my way up the stairs because everything is soaking wet. Toilet lines are cut. Tubs are, so when you cut a toilet line, the water just, you know what I mean?
Get out.
The sink taps were, the lines were pulled off, just water gushing all over. The toilet, the tubs are plugged, overflowing, and there's 2 tubs, 3 sinks, 2 toilets. Like, it was just crazy. Like, everything's just overflowing.
Oh my God.
I go downstairs. The drain, the floor drain has a plug in it, has something covering it, so nothing's draining. The bathroom's draining. The hot tub or the hot water tank is like fucked up, and it's just leaking all over because on the hot water tank there's a valve you can switch.
Yeah,
everything's just leaking. $176,000 worth of damage.
Oh my God.
170.
And so is that an insurance thing? Do you go after her? What is the deal?
Yeah. So I had insurance.
Press charges?
Well, yeah. So I had insurance. So my insurance kicks in and they come back and kind of, they take care of everything. And then the insurance company tries to sue her. She a long time ago waived her tenant insurance. So we make even back then I made tenants do their tenant insurance.
Yeah.
And but she canceled it because we don't know if a tenant continues on with tenant insurance. Like we make them sign all this stuff. We ask for proof. We do all this stuff. But the truth is the very next day they can cancel it.
Right.
We have no idea. And so anyway, so the insurance company tried to go after her, couldn't get anything. Anyways, I was covered. I got a brand new house for the most part, $176,000.
That is insane.
Isn't that
you know,
crazy?
it's so funny because last time I was in Edmonton, the reason I was like a little bit shocked at first that I'm like unsupervised because now when that happens, and it does still happen, and we make arrangements and we say, you can move out from this hour to this hour. And Teresa and I sat outside a place where the guy was evicted. But he left a bunch of his stuff. He came back for a couple hours. And Teresa and I sat out in the car for the 2 hours and watched them go back and forth. But you pre-call the police, start a file in case there's an issue because there was some instability in this situation. But there's a bunch of backup that you can do to, and
Teresa's so good, Carla. Like, Teresa's been through so many. I remember once we went to this eviction on 118th Ave in Edmonton, which is like the ghetto. Like it's a tough crowd, right? Tough area. And we go to this move out and the eviction. We ended up we had to bring a bailiff in. So we went to the house with a bailiff. The police were there. We had 2 police cars and the bailiff, and we had to change locks and seize the property. I thought for sure this lady was going to attack the police. She was like it was crazy. Like they had to escort her out of the house. It was insane. And now, like I've done evictions, I've done all kinds of stuff, but this eviction with Teresa that day, and I think Teresa probably she was fairly green with us. Like she's been with us for like 6-7 years now, but this was 6 years ago. She just started running my collections company, or the collections company, and it was like I was like, oh my god, like Teresa, go sit in the car. Like this is like someone's gonna get killed here, and let the cop and the bailiff do their stuff. Like this lady was going crazy. And anyways, we ended up getting the house back for our client, and we had all the furniture and we had to dispose of it. And, but at the end of the day, I look at all of these stories.
Yeah.
And I got lots. Like I got stripper stories, which we haven't talked about. I got grow up stories we haven't talked about. I got, tenants not paying rent stories we haven't talked about.
Yeah.
I got one more story.
Can we just go quickly back to Teresa?
Oh, yeah.
Because first of all, I would put $10 on Teresa against anybody. She's like
totally.
The feistiest little Italian.
Yeah,
but,
totally.
A lot of times we're referencing in this conversation, know the RTA, know the Residential Tenancy Act, but also, obviously there's the human perspective. But I'll take that one step farther. Like Teresa goes to hearings all the time. And the thing about the RTA is it's open to some interpretation by a hearing officer. Right. And I
call it kangaroo court because it's crazy. You just never know what's going to happen.
Oh my God. I have tenants, our clients, I walk them through this all the time and they're like, well, how does that make sense? How do they only have to pay for this much, but it costs this much? And I'm like, I know it doesn't seem fair, but there is discretion. But the thing with because she's in these hearings all the time, she can tell us, she advises clients and tells us on the property management side, hey, I understand that's the thing, but here's how they are ruling these days. Yeah. And so, just a big shout out to T.
Well, yeah. And on that note, like, so years ago, I went to a hearing at the Residential Tenancy Dispute Services. And the judge's name was Barron or something like that. Probably shouldn't say his name, but I just did. And
we'll bleep that out.
Yeah, totally. And I go to court, and I had all of this evidence. And this is probably why I don't do it anymore. Well, one, I got kicked out and I'm not allowed to go back. And
but this might be the reason, not the fact that you're not allowed.
Yeah. And 2, I just not wired for this. But anyways, we go to court. I have all of this evidence. Like Carla, I have stacks of paper. And I go to court. I'm like, this is a slam dunk. I got you. And this tenant goes to court with nothing. It's like she legit showed up with nothing. And I'm going through, I'm like, here's all my evidence. Here's this, here's pictures, here's this, here's the lease, here's emails, here's text messages, here's all this other stuff. And I don't remember the cost that I was trying to get. But the judge comes back and says he sided with the tenant because the tenant kept on saying, I didn't know that. I didn't know that. Although I have all of this information that said you knew that. And the judge comes back and says, yeah, you know, you're not getting awarded anything, whatever he said. To be honest, I don't remember how he worded it, but I fucking snapped. And I'm like, this is fucking bullshit. And I started yelling at him. And they brought in a security guard and like legit had to escort me out of the building because I was mad. I'm like, this is such a joke. Like, this system's stupid. You're stupid. What the heck do you know? And so fast forward a couple months later, I had another hearing that I had to do. But I did this one over the phone because I wasn't going in there. And it was the same.
Were you not going in there or you weren't allowed to go in there?
I probably wasn't allowed. But it was the same fucking guy. And I lost that one too. So the point of the story is it's a kangaroo. I call it kangaroo court because it's bouncing all over the place. Like you have no idea. They don't even know what they're doing. Yeah. Like they don't necessarily follow the evidence. They follow what they feel is right or how they feel a tenant hurt it or how, because they don't want the tenant to get hurt. Yeah. And they look at the landlord and say, oh, well, you're rich. Yeah. You know, you're rich. She's not. I'm going to err on her side and say, you pay this, you eat the cost. Yeah. Funny story. A couple years ago, we have a house. Chris and I have our old house up in Sturgeon County, which is just north of St. Albert in Edmonton. It's $1 million house. Couldn't sell it back in 2015 when we moved to Kelowna. So we just decided to keep it in rent. We rent to this couple. I won't say their name. If they're listening, they know who they are. It's so funny. And so that was 2015, 2016, maybe 2017, these tenants moved out. And they did about $7,500 worth of damage or something like that. And I don't handle anything with collections anymore. It's all Teresa, and Teresa's just a rock star. She's awesome. Anyways, a few months ago, I'm sitting on my couch and I get a text message. You fucking piece of shit. And it's this guy's name. Okay, because I still have the name in my phone. Yeah. And I said, oh, yeah, tell me more. Wow, what kind of man are you? We should meet out. Let's go meet. I'm going to show you this. Or like he's threatening me, right? Yeah. And I said, oh, let me guess. You want to meet by the bike racks after school? So I'm chirping him back. Yeah. So as I'm chirping him, I text Teresa. I said, let me guess. You either filed against them or you took money from them. And she's like, yeah, I got my first payment from him. So I text him back. I said, found you. So I'm chirping him back, and he just went ape shit on me. Yeah. So what happened was Teresa ended up filing against her credit and ended up finding him and started garnishing wages and all this other stuff. Yeah. So we ended up getting it.
So here's the thing about that. So even if you win in court, your ability to collect is really difficult. Mm-hmm. However, if you win in court, we can, because we have a relationship with the Landlord Credit Bureau, we can actually put it on their credit report. So when people go to buy a house,
Teresa filed on his bureau.
Yes. And so to get it off his bureau, he has to pay it. So whatever he was trying to do. And the beauty of it is that's why you check their credit, because you check their income to make sure if they've got good income, they're likely going to pay the bill. In the event they don't pay the bill, and you have to file against them, can you actually collect if you win? And that's the credit bureau portion.
Carla, this guy was so fucking mad. It was the funniest thing in the world. One more story on collections. So back in 2007, I had this house up in Jeep. I sold it. My sister ended up buying it, and she still owns it to this day. But I had this house, and I had this tenant. I forget his name. Normally, I remember everybody's name. But anyway, so I had this tenant. And he broke the lease, moved out, some damages, took him to court, won, filed it against his bureau. I didn't know anything at this point in time. Like I just had no idea. So I ended up doing it. I ended up filing it. Oh, you know what it was? I used a company to file it. That's what I did. A lady up in Grand Prairie to file it for me. Yeah. So she filed it on his credit. Never heard from this guy since. Okay. So this is back in 2008, 2009. And never heard from him at all. And in 2013, I get this phone call from this 2013, 2012, something like that. I get this phone call from this guy. Shelly. His name is Shelly. So Shelly calls me up and he's like, yeah, will you settle? And I'm like, what do you mean, will I settle? He's like, well, I owe you $7,500. Like, will you take $3,500? And
You're like, why are you calling me?
I'm like, no. I said, dude, you were a good dude. I get shit happened and you made a mistake. I get all that. But you're calling me for a reason.
Yeah.
And you need to clear that debt for something. And I'm like, you're either getting a mortgage, you're trying to get a car, you're trying to get a new credit card, something. I said, what is? He's going, I'm trying to get a mortgage. And I'm like, good for you. Like, good for you for cleaning up your life. That was awesome. Good job. He's like, yeah, well, you take $3,500. I said, no.
Of course I won't.
You owe me $7,500.
Yeah. You didn't come to me right after this got filed against you.
And I'm like, you're lucky I'm not charging you interest. Like, I'm actually out money because of this. Anyway, so the next day it took 2 days because he had to transfer 3 days. He had to transfer me this money.
Yeah.
And then I had to remove the debt. But this guy paid in full 5 years later.
Yeah.
Crazy story. So the point is if you do your due diligence up front, protect yourself, go the distance. Like, I'll take a tenant to court for anyone who owes me over $1,000. Under $1,000, it's a little tough. Anything over $1,000, I'll take him to court, because if I don't do that, the next time they move into a property of someone else's, it might be 10 grand. And if I don't take him to court and file against their credit bureau, you who goes to rent to them next, you do a credit check, you never see that. So I'm not doing the next landlord any kind of justice if I don't take them the distance and hold them accountable for their lease.
Yes.
So the point of all of this, guys, is horror stories happen. Who gives a fucking shit?
Yeah.
At the end of the day, like, I look at all the horror stories I've ever had, from not being able to pay bills to tenants shitbagging houses to my, parents telling me not to do it or is risky, or other, not just my parents, and nothing against my parents, but, like I've shared in the story before, they've seen 20% interest rates. I never did.
Right.
And my parents were not trying to tell me not to do it. They're just saying, hey, like, this is scary stuff. And they made it about interest rates. When other people you might be talking to might be saying, hey, I have a friend of a friend of a friend who had this happen. Well, yeah, sure. But the reason why that stuff happens more than likely is because you did a poor job screening the tenants. You didn't do any kind of checks whatsoever. You reacted versus did something thought out, which caused a fucking issue. Mm-hmm. So, like, look at all the tenants. We have close to 600 tenants, and it's rare that we have tenant issues because we do such a great job at screening our tenants. They do happen, but nowhere near, like, we don't hear the horror stories that these other people have.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. Horror stories will happen,
totally.
But I mean, to your point, proactively get in front of it, whether it be your interest rates and thinking ahead, whether it be any of those things. And when they do happen, then there's a way to go about it.
Yeah.
And
stay calm.
Stay calm.
Don't panic. Just get through it, and lean on people to help you get through it if you have to. But don't sell everything. Don't sell the farm, and don't worry about getting into real estate because of the fears, or like, don't let the fear stop you from getting into real estate, is what I'm trying to say. Mm-hmm. Because, like, you could go work for somebody for 20 years and get fired. They can sell their business, they can shut down, they can go bank. Like, shit can happen anywhere you go.
Yeah.
And real estate investing is awesome if you just understand that it's a 20-year play, and along the way shit's going to happen.
And in that proactiveness though too, like, not to overly promote Alberta, but one of the reasons that you like invest in Alberta is because there's favorable like.
Well, and I think that's a common mistake that lots of investors make. And we'll end on this note.
Are we not ending on the strippers?
No,
we have to end on the strippers.
No, we're already an hour. We're over an hour.
It has to be the strippers.
No. We'll
God.
share that for another day. What were you just saying? I
was just saying about Alberta, right?
Oh, Alberta. So this is a common mistake that I think every investor makes. And I see it happen in Ontario. I see it happen in BC and Saskatchewan, all over the place. The place you should be investing is the place that has the best rules, because ultimately the Landlord-Tenant Act governs the rules of the game. And in BC, for example, like, there's land transfer tax. There's land transfer tax in Ontario. There's no land transfer tax in Alberta. So right there, that's like $12,000, $15,000 savings.
Right.
Also in BC there, and in BC and in Ontario, there's a 2% maximum rent increase. And that's actually changed in BC recently, where the government, NDP government, has said there's a rent freeze now until the end of 2022. So anyone that has received a rent increase back however many months ago, it's void. So in same thing in Ontario, where they have a 2% rent increase, whereas in Alberta, they have an unlimited rent increase. So it's very important that as an investor, as a business owner, we understand the rules of the game, and then we invest in those areas or those cities or provinces that are going to be in our favor versus against us. And so I think that's a common mistake that most people do, is they don't really take the time to understand the tenant act. They just go buy a house.
Yeah. Which is really funny because, especially right now, when things are a little tougher, I've heard of a lot of renters like being approached by landlords in BC, being asked, hey, we need to raise your rent, but tenants know the act. Yeah. They're like, can't, dude.
Yeah.
So
they
know it. Be careful.
We have clients who rent out in Vancouver, and same thing. They're like, our landlord's trying to get us to raise rent. I'm like, no. Yeah. And, they're like, well, she refinanced and she needs to, get a higher rental amount to cover the bills. And I'm just like, no, like she can only do it 2%. It's not your fault. She hasn't done it in 7 years.
Yeah.
So she hasn't raised rent in 7 years. So now she's raising rent 2% off of 7 years ago rent. She's so far behind.
She'll never
catch up, especially now that COVID, taxes are going to go up. Property taxes are going up. Utilities are going up. Maintenance is going up. Like everything goes up. And plus now there's all this wear and tear on the house 7 years later. You'll never catch up. Anyways, Carla Berry, thank you very much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
Any parting words that you want to say?
Are there any parting words that I want to say other than the fact that I super enjoyed this?
This was awesome.
Yeah, this is so fun. I love talking the horror stories.
So
I could listen to them all day.
I'm going to get another mic.
Yeah.
And we're going to have 3 mics, and you, me, and Krista will do a podcast
of another horror story.
No,
or something else.
Yeah, of something. It could be anything. Like you know us, and you know who we are, and you know what we do, and you're very good on the mic, and you got lots of stories and lots to share. And so this was fun. It was
chatting with you and Krista lights me up. It's good. So I appreciate that.
I light me up chatting with me. So I get it.
You light you up. Okay. That's just what's happening here.
No, honestly, thanks for coming on the show. I really enjoyed it. For those of you who are listening, make sure you're sharing it. Make sure you're following it. We would love to have more than four followers. Our goal is to have 5.
Yeah, absolutely. Also, I'd encourage people, if there's something they want to hear about,
totally
tell us, because yeah,
absolutely. Share it. Follow us on Facebook, Jared and Krista, which is on Instagram as well. The Jared Hope is Instagram, and Facebook, which is me and Krista's K Hope 5. That's it. Thanks for listening.
Right on.
Any questions, just reach out. And make sure you share this damn thing. This is pretty darn funny.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks all.
Bye.